Hello everyone, today I'll be narrating 3 new creepyposts that I found off of the Let's Not Meet subreddit. Liking this video and subscribing to my channel helps me a lot. After you've heard these stories, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. But without further ado, let's dive straight into their experiences.
These are their stories.
This happened while I was in college 5 years ago. I was a transfer student and was 21 at the time. I was set up to be living in a building that was for students 21 or older and moved in a week and a half before classes began. This school was in northern Michigan, so when I first arrived, campus was dead. I mostly kept to myself, but was friendly with a few people in my building, namely one guy named Khalil, an exchange student from Lebanon. He seemed nice enough, though there was a distinct language barrier, so things were easily lost in translation. Our RD and RA, resident director, resident assistant, made everyone who had moved in have a meeting to go over basic rules and whatnot. At the end of the meeting, as I'm leaving the rec room, Khalil suddenly puts his arm up on the wall in front of me, almost clotheslining me. Caught off guard, I am peeved and creeped out about this. He begins explaining that he would like to be my friend and would like to go out for dinner to get to know me. He worded it oddly, so I wasn't sure if it was just a date or just a friendly invitation, but I attributed to his bad English. Like an idiot, I felt cornered physically and socially. I am awful with confrontation and could be too nice, so I agreed. He meant right then and there, however, and said, "I will get us a taxi and we'll go now." 10 minutes later, we're getting into this taxi, and as I'm entering, I feel this sense of dread. I think, I barely know this guy, and Hudson's, the restaurant, is a couple miles away and we will be stranded out there with this stranger if it gets weird. As we drive, my guard rises higher and higher. He wants to know everything about me, and is throwing questions rapid fire. My age, dating history, physical preferences in men, religion, family, everything. I am thinking, this is going to be really awkward, and wanted the night to be over before we even get to the restaurant. At the restaurant, we both look at the menu for a bit. The waiter comes and takes my order, salad, small and quick to eat, and then the waiter asks what Khalil wants. He says, "Oh no, I'm not hungry, I just want to watch her eat." What? Why would you ask me for dinner if you weren't hungry? And why did you just want me to eat? I was horrified. All of my family was in the lower peninsula of Michigan, 8 hours away. I had no friends up here. The only local numbers I had were of my RA and RD. I speed eat all of my salad as Khalil watches me, now talking about himself. He tells me about how he has anger problems and is looking for a woman to help calm him, but still be a submissive traditional wife. I am trying to hide the horror and uneasiness as I nod and eat. He continues explaining how he was known for his temper back home, and how his brothers have stopped him from doing awful things. At this point, red flags blinding my vision. It's time to end this. I finish my food and tell him to get a taxi back to campus. I intentionally sat in front of the taxi. I wasn't allowing the possibility of physical contact. When we get to the campus, we get in the building and I say a quick thank you and haul back to my room. Door locked, I get into my sweats and try to chalk it up to a weird experience and vow to avoid Khalil from then on. Around 12:30 a.m., I hear a knock on my door. I was watching Netflix and took out my earbuds to make sure I was hearing right. The knocking continues. Not a courteous knock knock knock, but a closed fist pounding. I am petrified and making as little noise as possible. Get to the door and look out the peephole. I see Khalil. My room is at the very end of a long hallway. All rooms around me empty at this point, with the door outside of my room leading to a parking lot surrounded by woods. Knowing how isolated I was, I slink away from the door, making zero noise just waiting for the knocking to stop. About a minute later, it stops. He growls, "I know you're in there. I will wait." My eyes widen in horror. I felt a mixture of rage and panic, but decided that confronting him then wouldn't be smart. So I quietly watched Netflix until I fall asleep. I have no idea how long he waited out there. The next morning, when I finally emerged from my room, I found a couple of pages taped to my door. 3 handwritten pages from Khalil, explaining his feelings for me and his intentions of making me his wife. I went straight to my RA and explained everything that happened. She agreed to meet with Khalil herself, to explain to him how inappropriate he was being, and to tell him to leave me alone. He didn't. Notes kept coming. He came to my door dozens of times a day, and I became pretty much trapped in my room hiding from this psycho. It lasted for 8 days, but classes began and Khalil disappeared. I was told he dropped out and moved back to Lebanon. I found it eerie how he just vanished. Had he come here solely to find a wife, I'll never know. But Khalil, let's not ever meet again. It was the middle of the afternoon and I was home from college for the weekend. Driving home from an auto shop, having just picked up my car after some repairs. It suddenly started making a loud grinding noise. My car was very old, things were always going wrong, so I pulled into a shopping center parking lot and called my parents for advice on whether I should take it back to the shop or get a tow. I know very little about cars. My mom told me she would come and meet me at the shopping center and we'd figure it out. At this point, my phone battery was also dying, so my phone shut off after the call. As I was hanging out in the parking lot, a guy pulled over on the street in front of me, rolled down his window, and asked me for directions. I did my best to direct him, but instead of taking off, he then pulled into the parking lot and got out of his car. I found that a bit weird. It was broad daylight, I was in front of a shopping center, cars were driving by constantly, it's not like it was nighttime in an abandoned alley. So the guy started to make what seemed like small talk and I complied, still not understanding what he wanted. He introduced himself and asked what my name was, and I offered my first name. He asked what I did. I said I was a student studying art. He asked where I went to school and I told him. He asked how old I was. He made a little more small talk, and then I guess seeing that I was a bit more relaxed, he said he was a sculptor and that if I was interested in art, I would love the sculptures he had at his house. He said we would go there right now and look at them. Immediately that dull alarm in the back of my head got turned way up. I was young and naive, but I knew enough to never ever get in a stranger's car and immediately felt very uncomfortable. Though he knew how old I was, I looked extremely young. I started to put two and two together. He was getting increasingly more insistent that I get in his car and go to his house. He reached for my arm, and at that point everything is a blur. I yelled that I had to go and ran from my car into the nearest store. It was a tiny game store, so there weren't really anywhere to hide, but I told the cashier about the guy and asked if I could wait in there until my mom showed up. The cashier assured me the man would not be let in the store and that he and his coworker would keep an eye on me until the man was gone. I also asked them if I could use their phone to call my mom and let her know what was going on since mine had died. I kept watching the guy outside by my car, worried he would try to come in, but as soon as he saw me use the store's phone, he got in his car and took off. I wish the story ended there. The whole encounter really shook me up, but as I reflected on it, I realized, through the questions the man had asked, he had my first name and exact birth date by asking how old I was and getting my birthday. He also knew where I went to school, though thankfully it was several hours away from my hometown where I encountered the man. I asked a friend of mine what kind of info he could get based on what he had, and much to my distress, my friend showed me he was able to find out my full name, my phone number, and my home address with the info I had given the man. I felt like such an idiot. I had always been taught to be wary of strangers and not give them personal info, and I was baffled by how easily this guy had gotten personal info out of me just by pretending to have a casual conversation. Nothing happened for a few weeks and I started to stress less, and stopped thinking about the encounter, and stopped worrying about running into the man again. Then one early morning my cell phone rang. The number was restricted. I answered. There was heavy breathing on the phone, but no reply. I hung up. It happened again the next morning. This time a man answered, asking, "What are you doing right now?" I said I was trying to sleep. "What are you wearing?" I immediately hung up. The calls continued. The next time I picked up, I told him if he called again, I'd call the police. I got a few more calls from a restricted number after that, but stopped answering, and eventually they stopped. I'm still not sure if the calls were from the man I met in the parking lot, but it seemed likely. It was just too much of a coincidence they started after that encounter. I spent a good year being afraid of that man. I still can't believe how foolish I was giving him info about myself so easily, and it was an important lesson in how smooth and sneaky creeps can be, and now I'm much more careful about what I say to strangers. I still don't know what he had planned if I had actually been foolish enough to get in his car, but I'm very glad I never found out. When I was 18, I worked in my college's residence building at the front desk, and I think I almost got assaulted or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms and half of the third floor were student rooms. The whole building operated with the hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated, and all the doors were powered by 4 AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the door. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working an overnight shift at around 1 or 2 a.m. and said he left his key card in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many room keys remade as they wanted, hypothetically. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary key card and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new key for his room and asked if he was a student or hotel guest, and he replied student. At this point, I should have checked our system to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgot. I used to trust people way too easy at this job, but quickly learned not. Later on the night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., he came to the desk again and said he couldn't get into his room. I asked if he just forgot his key again, and he said no. The door wasn't working. I asked if the light was coming on when he swiped his card, and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I'd changed the batteries, and I went up to his room with him. He asked me for my name, and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the room door manually with the master key, and I told him I'd have to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, "No, it's okay, I'll close it," and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really weird, but I tried not to think about it. I had changed the batteries on plenty of other doors by this point, and some students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their room to be on display for anyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent, and I thought he might be an international student since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe it was also just a language barrier issue. At this point though, I really felt like something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. While I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he kept trying to entice me to go further into the room, saying his bed was broken and he needed me to take a look at it, there was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, "I have a key, go get it," and threw it under the bed. He said there was a leak under the fridge. He just kept trying to get me down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him no. I'd send maintenance up in the morning to take a look at it if anything was broken. I had my back to him and he asked me if I would take off my glasses. I said, "No, I need them to see." His tone of voice changed. In the most steady, chilling manner, he said, "Ella, it's okay, you can take them off." And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away and, trying to remain composure, said, "No thanks, I need to keep them on," even though he was creeping me out. I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get in trouble if he complained about me, or risk upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit and undid the door deadbolt and opened it up in the process. He jumped toward the door to close it again and told me to keep it closed. I told him no, I had to open it to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with the little wispy hairs at the top of my forehead and tried to touch my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me and focus on getting out of there. He once again tried getting me to follow him into the bedroom, saying the bed was broken, and I went as far as the door frame to see if I could spot any actual problem with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in the kitchen, no shower curtain in the bathroom, no sheets in the bed, nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back to the international student theory, thinking he had just arrived today and hadn't got a chance to buy anything yet. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few more seconds before announcing that it was fixed, and quickly gathered the door kit and left. Before I had reached the elevator, he came back out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes and called out, "Ella, the door isn't fixed, you need to come back." I went back and opened the door manually and told him if the door was broken, I'd have to send up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got to the front desk, I checked the computer and saw that the room he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in our back office and called campus security. He came down a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait, now that I knew he wasn't a resident. He tore the corner off a slip of paper I had sitting on the desk and drew a flower on it, then put it back on top of my papers. When security arrived, he ran back up to the empty room and tried convincing them he lived there so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which I decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to ask me if he really did live there. Obviously he didn't, that's why I called you guys crying and terrified. He kept interjecting to argue that he did live there, but couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for a student card and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove he lived there. While they were grabbing his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave was prefixed by, as if he was trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said, "across the street." One security guard asked if he lived in the apartments across the street and he said yes, but couldn't tell them what the building number was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months ago later and apartment 1200 doesn't exist. When security asked what his purpose was to be sneaking into a room, he just kept up the ums and the uhs and saying he didn't know. They'd ask, "Were you trying to see a friend? Do you know anybody who lives here? Were you here to hurt somebody?" And he kept fidgeting and saying, "I don't know, no reason, I was just here." At one point he tried to tell them he was my friend, at which point I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally had never seen him before that night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still unsettling. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured out that the room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later, a housekeeper came to the desk and told me they found the door deadbolted open, the TV on, and a housekeeper inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left for the night, and when the creep let himself into the building, he found out. I never saw him again, and to this day, I still have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last winter, and overnight shifts still give me the creeps. Alright, so that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments below. But as always,
Have a nice day.